So we've got geography now. Bhutan. Bhutan, known as the second best flag with a dragon on it, right behind Wales. I guess there is something I really like about Bhutan's dragon on its flag. It is more kind of like an Eastern idea of a dragon. It's a bit more majestic and a little less sharp, like the Welsh dragon is, where it looks like it's just really pointy and stuff like that. I love the Welsh dragon, but I think the Bhutan one is a little bit more, I guess, sophisticated in its appearance, though I still think the Welsh flag is one of my favorites. Just because, like, as a kid, if I were drawing a flag, that's what I would want it to look like. So we're going to be getting started with Bhutan. I'm very interested in learning about that flag. I don't know what else I want to learn about Bhutan, though, because I fixate on the flag so much that I never really thought to ask much more about it. But it should be interesting. So let's get us started with that one. Ah, no. Spoilers. There we go.
So one thing you might not know is that Bhutan is a country.
Oh no, that's not nice.
Hey everybody, I'm your host Paul Barbato, please call me Barbie. And today we head out to the Himalayas, so make sure you strap your boots on because we're going to Bhutan. No, but seriously,
cool.
Here, let's dissect the flag. The flag is divided diagonally into two separate parts, the yellow and the orange. In the middle is a large black and white dragon. The yellow represents the civil tradition and temporal authority of the king. Typically, kings will wear yellow scarves on their garbs, and the orange represents Buddhism. The dragon is Druk, the thunder dragon from Bhutanese mythology.
Oh, it has a name. That's so cute.
Straddled between the two colors to signify the equal importance of both civic and monastic traditions of the country. Druk the dragon is white to signify the purity of inner thoughts and deeds, and is carrying 4 jewels in each claw to signify the wealth and security of the country. Dude.
So I, for the longest time, like a lot of people, I know I'm not alone on this, thought that he was holding apples or some form of fruit. They do not look like jewels to me. There is no texture to them that implies that they have to be jewels. I see it now that you point it out, but without somebody telling me, I could imply that's a lot of things. So yeah, I thought apples. They look like apples to me.
Deeds, and is carrying 4 jewels in each claw to signify the wealth and security of the country. Dude, this flag has a dragon on it. That's a win in my book.
I kind of want to color it in, though. You know, that's kind of how it's always made me feel. It looks like a blank coloring page with a filled-in background. Like, I really want to color its scales. I don't know. I just want to make it. I don't know what color I would go in on, but you know, it looks like Shenron. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. It's like kind of more of an Eastern idea of what a dragon looks like, so it would look a little bit more like Shenron from Dragon Ball.
Cool little interesting side note.
He's holding the Dragon Balls, that's it.
Druk Tseden, which means the land of the Thunder Dragon. Alright, so now let's talk about where it's located. First of all, Bhutan is landlocked in Asia, right above India, below China's Tibetan Plateau, and close to Nepal in the west, but separated by India's Sikkim district. The capital is Thimphu, located in the northwest part of the country, and is divided into 20 districts, or zongas, which technically translates to fortress areas. Now, when you look at the map, Bhutan actually has 3 disputed areas with China in the west and in the north parts of the country. In the west, you have the Doklam Plateau, and in the north, you have the Jakarlung and Pasamnung valleys. Now, here's the thing. Bhutan is actually...
Wait, can I see that?
Plateau,
Not
and
this
in the
part,
north...
this part. Is that like where a mountain is? Are they disputing the far side of a mountain?
Have the Jakarlung and Pasamnung valleys. Now, here's the thing.
Oh,
Bhutan is actually
valleys,
incredibly isolated from the rest of the world. In fact, they only have 1 international airport. Paro Airport, in the town of Paro, known for its world-famous Tiger's Nest Monastery built on a cliff with a 900-meter drop, located about 22 miles away from Thimphu. The airport only has 1 runway, but a beautiful terminal built in the style of traditional Bhutanese Dzong architecture. Now, here's the thing. Getting into Bhutan is a little difficult because foreigners are allowed to go in, but they have to pay a $250 daily tariff. That's right, every day you spend in Bhutan will cost you a minimum of $250. Of course, this cost covers a state-provided hotel and a tour guide that will take you around. However,
then that's not bad at all. $250 a day for like you get a tour guide with it, dude. That like to pay a tour guide for a full day. Like if you take full advantage of that, that could be pretty good. I would never do it because I'm broke, but honestly, like that's not insane to me.
Cool thing is, a portion of this money goes towards funding educational facilities in Bhutan. So when you go there and pay the tariff, you're actually kind of inadvertently helping the country as well. The only foreigners that are exempt from this tariff are Indians, Bengalis, and Maldivians. All they have to do is just show their IDs. They don't even need a passport, and they don't have to pay for the tariff. Francais? Pay up. Svensk? Pay up. Canadian? Oh, you better pay up. Indian? Oh, sure enough, sugar. Come over here. Let's have some sweet tea and crawfish. I don't know why I made Bhutan a Cajun black guy, but just now, although there are many dirt paths that technically cross the border of Bhutan from India, there are only 3 main highways and roads that people typically use.
So I think this is telling us a thing or two about the friend zone without us having to really get a whole lot of context there.
Anga Road, the 152 Bhutan Road, and the most common one, the Point Choling Timbu Highway, located on the border towns of Point Choling, Bhutan, and Jalgaon, India. Most people use this road to get in. The cities and towns are almost like stepping into a time warp. Many of the buildings and towns are well preserved and over hundreds of years old, including many of the dzongs or fortresses. In fact, the language of Bhutan is called Dzongkha, or the language of the fortress. This means that Bhutan has kind of maintained the ambiance of a strange balance between ancient and slow, deliberate modernization, and you can see that in pretty much every town you go. Unfortunately, getting around in Bhutan can be...
I kind of like that. I don't like it when people like totally destroy like the traditional architecture and stuff in favor of like more modernized stuff, because especially countries that are influenced by people from the outside, that tends to make me a little bit that's kind of lame that they're getting rid of all this in favor of this new stuff. The new stuff's great and all, but I like kind of the hybridization of like the more modern architecture with the older stuff. It gives a place a little bit more visual identity.
Deliberate modernization, and you can see that in pretty much
but it's
every
also
town you
practical.
go. Unfortunately, getting around in Bhutan can be quite tedious because every single road and highway has to traverse steep Himalayan mountains, and these mountains are actually really important to the people, and we'll discuss those mountains in... Now, when it comes to landscape, Bhutan takes things very, very seriously. In fact, it's disputably the most greenest, eco-friendly country in the world. And it's actually quite Bhutan-iful. No? Okay.
No.
First off, the country is located almost entirely in the southern slopes of the Himalayan mountain range, and the country is almost completely mountainous with steep valleys and alpine hills that eventually drain into the southern plains of India. In fact, at about 7,000 meters, or about 24,000 feet, Bhutan actually has the world's highest unclimbed mountain, Gangkhar Puensum. It's considered a holy site to the Bhutanese people and is therefore left alone. Also, as of right now, Bhutan is the world's only carbon sink nation. This means they actually absorb more CO2 than they produce, and this can be attributed to a lot of things. For one, it's the only country in the world with constitutional obligations set upon its citizens to maintain at least 60% of the land under forest cover. Right now, Bhutan is at about 70%. If people cut down trees to aid the construction of their homes, they're typically required to plant new trees to replace the ones that they chop down. Most of the country is powered by hydroelectric power that they...
I mean, that's a pretty good policy. Like, if you have the space and you can afford it, absolutely. That's actually... That's really interesting. I'm from a place where we really are leaning into trying to convert to more green energy and like try to be generally a more green place. But like if you got that open space, like lean into what you got, yo.
Receive from turbines from hydroelectric plants. In fact, hydroelectricity makes up about 40% of Bhutan's export sector, mostly as they sell it to India, which also makes Bhutan the only country in the world where renewable energy is their largest export. In recent years, Bhutan's mission was to provide every single citizen with electricity. If rural households didn't have electricity...
Now that's what I'm going to be thinking of first. It used to be, oh, flag. It's probably still going to be the flag first, but that's the thing I'm going to be remembering when it comes to Bhutan, because that's a very distinct trait among the international community.
the government would issue free solar panels, even though sunlight is kind of limited in the Himalayas. Bhutan is also the only country in the world that completely banned plastic bags, as they are seen as a major source of pollution, and they also completely banned tobacco and cigarettes. Another thing Bhutan takes very seriously is its
What about
wildlife.
freedom?
Various animals like langurs, Bengal tigers, sloth bears, red pandas, sambars, the beautiful and rare clouded leopard, blue sheep, and those strange barking deer that have fangs. I'm not even joking, there's an animal called the barking deer and it has fangs.
Oh, that's
In
its
fact,
name?
It's a very serious punishable crime to kill any endangered species in Bhutan. If anybody is caught killing a black-necked crane, they could receive a life sentence in prison. The food here is great, by the way.
So it seems like they're very punitive. That seems to be a very common theme here. Like, hey, let's be really cool, but if you break the peace, we will come down on you and rain fire and hell and death and murder. Well, we've got nothing really that bad, but like they do seem to have a bit of a punitive streak. I wonder if the death penalty's there.
Believe it or not, these people actually like really spicy foods. Let's talk more about these people. Due to the isolation and mandated culture rules, the people of Bhutan are, without a doubt, some of the most notably distinct and intriguing inhabitants of Earth. First of all, although the numbers are debatable, modern estimates put the country at a population of somewhere around 800,000 people. About half of them identify as Ngolop and 22% as a similar Sharchop, or the Eastern people. This can also include the indigenous tribes found within Bhutan. And 28% identify as Lhotshampa, or the Southern people, mostly in Nepalese origin. Most of the people in Bhutan, about 70%, identify with either the Kagyu or the Nyingma branches of Buddhism, and the remaining, about 28%, identify with Hinduism, mostly the Lotshampas in the south. The official language is...
Look at the colors, it's like the flag.
28% identify with
Hinduism,
they did that mostly the Lotshampas in the south. They've spoken throughout the country. Dzonga, however, there are about 53 other Tibetan-based languages and dialects spoken throughout the country. Bhutanese people are very intent on maintaining their nationalism and identity, so much to the point where the king issued a culture law that decreed all citizens to adhere to certain standards of life to maintain the Bhutanese identity amongst the citizens. This meant things like mandatory clothing laws, rituals, holidays, and so on. To this day, when entering government buildings and offices and culture centers, men are required to wear a go and women are required to wear a kira, the traditional clothing of Bhutan. This rule caused a lot of backlash, especially with the Lotshampa minority, whom were mostly Nepalese and refused to follow the culture and wardrobe law. Things got so bad that Bhutan...
So, like, being kind of socially socially conservative and a bit hard-handed with it too. Probably not too fond of like the globalization of the world, where all these different cultures are becoming so interconnected that you kind of lose that unique identity but create a new sort of identity amongst like the international community that takes in lots of other things. Okay, I don't know if I love that. There are things that I love about this so far, but that, I don't know. We in Rhode Island don't play well by the rules. Forced dressing up stinks in God's nostrils or something. I'm pretty sure that's the quote.
Bhutan actually ended up exiling over 100,000 Lotshampas for not adhering to the culture laws, and to this day, many of them are in exile, mostly in India. Bhutanese culture, or more specifically the Ngolop and Sharchop groups, are heavily influenced by Tibetan culture. To put it in the simplest way I can, Bhutan is kind of like an extension of the Tibetan Empire that kind of went a little rogue and did its own little thing. The official language, Dzonga, is actually very similar to the Tibetan language, and they even use the same alphabet. The only difference is some of the letters make different sounds, but overall, generally, people who speak Dzonga can understand what Tibetan people are saying more often than not, and vice versa. The Sikkimese people of northern India also have a similar language structure to Dzonga, but it's a little bit more unintelligible and they write a different way too. To make things even crazier, due to a former ban from the former king, Bhutan didn't even have any TVs until 1999 and internet until the early 2000s. And to this day, Bhutan is the only country in the world that deliberately chooses to not have any traffic lights and instead opts for traffic guards. Even North Korea has traffic lights, although most of them don't work. Bhutanese TV...
I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's an effectiveness to that. Having, like... Maybe this is just, like, anecdotal, but I see people straight up disregarding that stuff all the time. It might be a little harder to disregard it if it's, like, a just a straight up person standing in the middle of the road waving traffic. I don't know. Maybe it's effective. I could see that working.
Though is not restrictive. They can pretty much watch anything they want. CNN, BBC, Cartoon Network. However, there are two government networks, BBS1 and BBS2, that cover a variety of TV shows and newscasts, all in the Dzonga language. Oh, and that's the other thing. Bhutan is a monarchy, formerly an absolute monarchy, but about 20 years ago the system changed so that now the king can be impeached by a 2/3 majority vote of the National Assembly. Coronated in 2008 after his father abdicated, Jigme Kesar.
So it's a pretty recent sort of kind of constitutional monarchy is what I'm getting in here. Also in the chat. So that's interesting. A 2/3 vote is a lot. That's very hard to get. But that is like one of the big critiques of monarchy. It's like if you have a sort of monarchy that, well, okay, you have a monarchy where the people like the king, but they don't have any power to impeach them if they don't like him. Then it doesn't really matter if you like the king or queen or whatever, because your opinion doesn't really matter there. But if you do add in the element where there is some room to legally remove the king, then there is at least a little bit of accountability there. So I kind of like that.
Namgyel Wanchuk is the current monarch, with his wife Queen Jetsun Pema being arguably the world's most attractive monarchs. Bhutan is of course a very highly influenced nation that mostly follows...
Don't need any references. They are... I mean, come on, look at that.
Most attractive monarchs. Bhutan is, of course, a very highly Buddhist-influenced nation that mostly follows the Drukpa Kagyutpa branch of Buddhism. This involves a plethora of colorful shrines, temples, and statues and prayer wheels that are a part of everyday life, rural or urban. English is taught in schools, making Bhutan a surprisingly English-friendly country despite the lack of relations that they have with the US and the UK. This is partially attributed to the nationals being able to speak it with their Indian and Bengali friends and tourists. However, those aren't the only people that Bhutan speaks to. Now, Bhutan may be closed off from the rest of the world. However, it's weird because they're also kind of passively open to everybody else. Now, like mentioned before, India and Bangladesh are the only two countries that have embassies in Bhutan and are close partners in business and trade. Bhutan trusts India and Bangladesh enough to the point where they don't believe their country's cultural values will be a threat to the presence of these people. Nonetheless, there is still a stark contrast in culture between these nations, with India predominantly Hindu and Bangladesh predominantly Muslim in influence. Nepal has a little bit of a bone to pick with Bhutan. Now, of course, like mentioned before, back in the 90s, over 100,000 Nepalese people were forced into exile after the king made the cultural customs decree after feeling a slight threat from the Nepalese minority that weren't adhering to the Bhutanese customs. Bhutan was kind of harshly criticized for this. Then there's China, which after the siege of Tibet in 1959 effectively closed off all relations with Bhutan. Essentially, they have some...
Neron's got a fun fact about Sri Lanka, and I have to stop and read it right now because it's kind of adorable. Here in Sri Lanka, traffic lights are pretty rare, and when you find small kids will be super excited about them. That's really funny. That's kind of adorable.
Drama with China. It got even worse when Chinese soldiers were spotted building some roads with the disputed Doklam Plateau region. China claims this was not done for any aggression, but Bhutan claims that China did this to further their territorial claims on the region. China, what the? Oh no, oh gosh golly, did I get too close? Oh, well, I mean, it's already there. I may as well just leave the road.
I mean, what are you gonna do?
It's kind of funny because in terms of their best friends, Bhutan would probably consider the Tibet region, and specifically the ethnic Tibetan peoples of China, but of course not the rest of China. After Chinese occupation, numerous Tibetans fled to Bhutan as refugees.
So this China relationship is very complicated. It just got even more complicated when you throw the Tibetan people in there.
Refugees and are seen as like the close brothers of Bhutan.
That's a weird flag. That is a very weird flag. I kind of like it, but it just stood out to me like, oh, that's a flag. Why is it surrounded on 3 sides? Is it flown horizontally like that? Would the flagpole be on the right or the left?
Historical ties, religions, practices, and lifestyles that make them get along very well. In conclusion, Bhutan is like the little Buddhist kingdom that broke away and did its own little thing, who didn't really care what others had to say, but now they kind of do care, but that's okay. There's nothing wrong with caring about what others think of you, as long as you don't take it to the degree of basing all of your self-worth and value off of it.
Yay!
Stay tuned, Bolivia is coming up next.
That's pretty cool. Bhutan, that's probably one of the most interesting ones I've seen so far. It helps that I think his stuff is generally just getting better the longer he goes on. He even commented on it in like a previous video, like, hey, I'm getting better at this. That's like the weird thing, watching his stuff from the beginning of his channel, because we really get to see him change a whole lot as like a presenter, visually, sound wise. It sounds like wonderful compared to like the early videos. It's really wonderful. I love seeing him grow as a creator from this like ignorant place in the past that I'm in. So that's really cool. So we are going to be doing at least one more, right? That sounds right. We could do geography now. Bolivia. Why not? Let me pull that up. So we're going to like a completely different region of the world. So geography now, Bolivia. This should be really interesting. I find the history of Bolivia to be something that I am very curious about, which is good because in the next live stream, Social Stud Live 5, we're going to be checking out some stuff on Simón Bolívar, which is going to teach us a little bit about Bolivia's history. But for now, let's get a little bit of a foundation on it. Why not? It's good to have like a broad idea of something before you get the specific idea of something, because it makes it easier to absorb the more specific ideas around a place. So there we go. Geography now, Bolivia. And from after this, I'm not sure what we're going to be doing on the stream. I guess I'm just going to have to figure it out from there. I'll see what other videos I have banked. So let's get this started.
Hey Geography peeps, so I actually had the pleasure of going to Bolivia a couple of years ago, so in this episode,
cool.
You're going to see some of the great footage that I took with my crappy 2010 Panasonic camcorder. It's time to learn geography now! Oh, we are so gonna live it up in Bolivia. Ha! Flag time.
Yeah.
All right.
So this, the colors are interesting and not entirely uncommon for flag colors. There is something that, I don't know, there is something about it where I'm like not surprised about like Spanish origins. Or, yeah, it was Spanish origins, yeah.
Another flag that has a lot of things to look at. Let's see if we can do this faster than Belize's flag, shall we? First of all, the flag is a horizontal tricolor flag with 3 bands, red, yellow, and green, with the coat of arms in the center. The red represents, once again, say it with me, the blood shed for those who fought for the country. The yellow represents the wealth of resources, and the green represents the richness of natural areas and hope. The coat of arms is a little more complex. First of all, in the center is a cartouche image of Mount Potosi with the sun rising over it, with a llama, a palm tree, and a bale of wheat representing.
I've never been a huge fan of these flags that have little tiny mural crest things in the middle. Never been a huge fan there. Yeah, Fritos makes an interesting observation how like a lot of the African nations have flag colors like this. This being a South American nation, it's a little bit different, but it is interesting that it does have kind of this the main 3 colors you'll see in so many different countries over there.
The nation's resources, surrounded by a blue border with 10 stars
representing
the 9 departments and the 10th former province, Litoral, which was taken by Chile in the 1800s. Finally, you have the name of Bolivia above. Then you have 6 Bolivian flags on either side, once again making Bolivia one of the few countries that has a flag with miniature versions of its own flag on its own flag. Then you have the 4 muskets in the back with 2 cannons in front representing the struggle and fight for independence. On top of the cannons, you have a Phrygian hood and an axe representing liberty and freedom.
freedom.
On top of everything, you have a condor and laurel branches that stand for peace and the willingness to defend.
A condor.
Keep in mind, you also might see this flag a lot in Bolivia, also known as the huipala, which is also kind of seen as a national symbol, but could also be referenced towards the indigenous people of Bolivia, and more specifically the Aymara people, which make up a huge population demographic of the country.
I've never seen that flag before. That is actually pretty fascinating there. It's a pretty easy to follow design. It's not the type of thing, like a geometric pattern like that is something that I don't typically see on flags with like that many small squares and just kind of a rainbow pattern, but that's, like, I'm down for it. It's just different.
Bolivia, and more specifically the Aymara people.
To be fair, a lot of native flags, they have very unique designs when I'm so used to very European inspired designs. Like I'll see some of the stuff that they have that represent native cultures, and they just stand out in just a different way.
People, which make up a huge population
Hi, Bird Mom.
demographic of the country.
Hope you're having a good day.
Did we beat Belize? All right, Bolivia, you are in the lead as the most complex flag that we have done here on Geography Now. Congrats. Bolivia is a very interestingly situated country, and to kind of understand it, you have to travel back in time. But later, not now. First off, today Bolivia is landlocked, located in South America, bordered by 5 other countries: Peru, Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, and Chile. The country has very meticulously surveyed borders with...
Yeah, that's always interesting. There's not a lot of landlocked nations in the New World in general. I think it is just the 2, which is fascinating. And being a landlocked nation always comes with its own struggles. There's always some sort of issues with, like, access to the water being just, like, absolutely essential for international relations often. So I'm curious to how that might come into play.
Peru, Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, and Chile. The country has very
Paraguay. That's the other landlocked one, right?
Peru, Brazil, Paraguay.
Yeah, it's these 2. They're just stuck kind of in the middle.
Argentina, and Chile. The country has very meticulously surveyed borders with every single one of its neighbor countries, and that's kind of partially because they kind of had a lot of wars with every single one of them. Even little Paraguay? Oh, especially Paraguay. That little dude knows how to fight. Now, here's the thing. In the past, Bolivia actually had a lot more land than it did today. In fact, in the past, it had a province called Litoral, which is what the 10th star on the flag is referring to, which was the only area that Bolivia had access to the ocean. Long story short, Chile got that part, Brazil took these parts, and Paraguay got this part. So anyway, Bolivia...
So they weren't always landlocked. That's actually a fun fact I could use at a later point.
Is divided into 9 regions, and technically it has 2 capitals: La Paz, also known by its official name Nuestra Señora de la Paz, which means Our Lady of Peace, and Sucre, which means sugar. It's a little hard to explain, but essentially Sucre is the constitutional capital where the Supreme Court is located, but La Paz is where all the seats of government reside. The legislative, executive branches are both found in the city, and even the president resides in the Palacio Quemado Palace in La Paz. And since China took over Tibet, that made La Paz the world's highest capital at about 12,000 feet or 3,700 meters above sea level. The height is so extreme that typically visitors might find themselves short of breathing and might experience altitude sickness, in which the Bolivians will be happy to provide you with coca leaves, not cocoa leaves, coca leaves, as a remedy.
Wait.
You can either make it into a tea or chew them up raw and dried. Water all...
Coca. I get so confused around all the coca, the cocoa, isn't that the cocaine leaf? Am I wrong? Am I being dumb? Isn't that the cocaine thing?
Also boils at a...
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, you put the coca in the cola, and then you have a good time.
Different temperature at about 88 degrees Celsius, which makes things typically take a little bit longer to cook. Also, the air pressure is so light here that many plasma TVs don't even work, and it has to do with some kind of sciencey reason about the phosphopods being lit by electrodes. I don't know. It's time to learn some chemistry later! La Paz is a beautiful city with the frighteningly majestic snow-capped Mount Illimani overlooking everything in the southwest. It has a plethora of skyscrapers and monuments. Getting out...
Yes, it is the drug leaf. Cool. I'm glad somebody told me, or I was gonna have to look it up after this, and I didn't want to. Okay, you put the coca in the cola. I don't know if it's like the same effect or whatever. Clearly, if it was just if eating the leaf was the same, you wouldn't need it to be in like different forms. So like I understand that things are not always so simple. So I'm not gonna say like it's the same thing because first of all, I have no idea, and it's almost certainly not.
Out of La Paz is the tricky part. This glorious urban gem is locked and tucked away in the Andes Mountains, so you really only have like two extreme options. If you head west, you have to pass through the driest desert in the world, the Atacama, which looks virtually indistinguishable from the moon at some points with no living plants in sight for miles. And heading east, you have to pass through the mountains where you are so high you can literally see the clouds below you as you drive into the tropical Amazon basin. But before you do, you have to go on the Yungas Highway, otherwise known as the Calle del Muerte, or
Calle
Death
del
Road. The road
Muerte.
at its narrowest is only about 3 meters wide, or the width of an actual vehicle, and sits over the ledge of a drop well over 600 meters or 2,000 feet with no guardrail. Nonetheless, this road is still technically a 2-lane highway that offers traffic to drivers going in each direction.
That's
Every
so
few hundred meters,
stupid.
there are shoulder curbs that drivers can use to allow other cars to pass on the opposite side. Every year it's
I mean, I know it's probably like necessary or whatever, and you gotta work with your geography or something, but that sounds awful.
estimated that about 200 to 300 people die on this road alone. However, it's
Oh,
funny
yeah?
because
Really?
this one road has actually become a huge tourist destination of Bolivia. Yeah, the landscape in Bolivia is quite intense. Let's talk about that in... Okay, so Bolivia has some of the most contrasting landscapes you'll see in all of South America, let alone the world. First of all, about a third of the country is covered in the rocky, dry, snow-capped Andes Mountains to the west, and to the east, after traversing the mountains, you enter the hot, humid, wet pampas or rainforest zone. As the most sparsely populated country in all of South America, Bolivia's interior is widely untouched and uncultivated. In fact, you can even book your own 3-day eco tour that involves getting your own cabin, food, and doing activities like fishing for piranhas, feeding wild monkeys, interacting with crocodiles, and swimming with pink river dolphins, all for about $70. Yeah, the exchange rate is that good in
That's
Bolivia.
pretty good value.
Otherwise, if you stay in the west side, you can still experience some amazing geological anomalies. In the south, in the Potosi province, you reach Salar de Uyuni, the world's largest salt flat. In the dry summer months, this creepishly serene area is a completely flat white salt bed that goes on and on for miles to the ends of the horizon. In the wet winter months, the rains pour down heavily, covering the entire area in a shallow, watery gloss that you can walk in, and respectively becomes the world's largest mirror. Further north, closer to
That's
La Paz, you reach
beautiful.
Lake Titicaca, lake, the highest lake in the world, which they share with Peru. It's kind of funny though, because even though Bolivia doesn't have a coastline, they still have a navy, which for the most part patrols over the lakes and the rivers. Agriculture makes up about a quarter of the GDP.
I mean, even if you don't have like access to the ocean, most countries will maintain some degree of a navy. It's just not always exactly what you'll think when you think of a navy.
Even though about 2% of the country is cultivated for crops. Despite the fact that arable land is quite abundant, it's just not used. Cash crops are coffee, cotton, and coca, not cocoa, coca, the controversial little leaf that when used correctly can help heal sickness, and when used destructively can create a little drug known for causing the deaths of many. I'm talking about gin martinis. Nah, I'm just kidding. I'm talking about cocaine. No, but seriously, gin martinis are like the worst thing ever. I don't understand why anybody would have... Sorry, this is about Bolivia again. No, but seriously, the coca leaf has been grown in the country for centuries and has actually gotten Bolivia in a lot of heat, even with some of their friends. Friends we'll discuss about in the friend zone, but first we have to talk about the...
Are we going to be getting into like international drug trafficking here in the friend zone? Tell me we're going to get into international drug trafficking, because this could be very useful for me to know. I don't understand it at all, really. Well, I have a very basic understanding of the American international drug trafficking system. I don't know where Bolivia fits in, but clearly cocaine.
Bolivia's people are pretty much unlike any other people in South America, and here's why. First of all, the country has a little over 10.5 million people, and along with Peru, is one of only 2 countries in South America in which Amerindians make up the majority, and is the only country in the Americas, let alone the world, in which Amerindians make up over half of the population. Otherwise, about
Amerindian is a term, it's just American Indian. It's a term that I try to use more, because like nobody objects to it. Some people object to the use of Native American because it seems like it's like like weirdly PC and like watering it down, just trying to be sensitive or whatever. But there are also people who object to Indian because like it's kind of a misnomer in a way. Amerindian, nobody objects to it, but very few people actually use the term Amerindian in the United States. But I'm trying to get more into the habit of using that term because I think it's the perfect term. Like people can be Indian in and not be from India. They just became that identity independently of one another. But I think Amerindian is a nice thing where it allows that title, but also has a strong differentiator.
About 30% are mestizo and about 15% are white.
It's not for me to decide really what's appropriate, but it's what I like to lean into.
In terms of Amerindian subdivisions, there are 30 people groups. However, the largest ones are the Quichua, the Aymara, and the Guarani. Most of the Aymaras and Quichuas live in the west in the Andes mountain range, whereas most of the Guaranis and other Amazon tribal peoples live mostly in the east and in the heavily forested Pampas, which in addition to Spanish make up the 4 official languages of Bolivia. At the end of the day, however, pretty much everybody speaks Spanish. However, Bolivian Spanish is a little different from the standard Mexican or Spain Spanish that most people are taught. In addition to an accent heavily influenced by indigenous languages, a whole different vocabulary exists. For example, instead of hearing hombre, you might hear varone. Instead of hearing basura, you might hear chorita. And sometimes niño becomes tili. No tengo dinero. Huh? Estoy yesca? Ah. Now, here's how Bolivia kind of divides itself. Kind of like Belgium, you have 2 regionally distinct identifiable people groups. The Collas, or the people who live in the west by the Andes, and the Cambas, or the people that live in the east in the rainforest. I mean, technically there's a 3rd people group called the Chapacos who kind of have their own little thing going on, and the people of Tarija identify more with Argentina rather than any people group, but most people fall within the Colla and Camba categories. These 2 people groups are quite distinct in their cultures due to the fact that they live completely different lives in completely different atmospheres that they've adapted to. Culture-wise, Bolivia is quite noticeably particular from its neighbors. For one, they are much more heavily influenced by indigenous customs, rituals, and clothing, and even festivals. Interesting side note, you can typically bet on it that a woman is from Bolivia if you see her wearing one of those round, small bowler hats, whereas Peruvian women like to wear the Western hats with the flatter brim. Granted, I'm not saying all Peruvian or Bolivian women look like that, I'm just saying it's a very prevalent look in many of the rural areas. Ha! Good move, Paul. You win this round. We're watching you. Another funny side.
Is that our first costume change in the series? Is that going to become a recurring thing? Because I don't think I've seen him do something like that yet.
No, if you visit La Paz and El Alto,
that's not just an issue with women or whatever, but in general, we generalize other cultures, and to a degree, it makes it easier to understand broad ideas and find commonalities between people, but it's often good to every once in a while clarify that I don't mean all, because, plenty of people will take you at that you mean all.
Win this round, but we're watching you. Another funny side note, if you visit La Paz and El Alto, make sure you buy a ticket to buy the wrestling Cholitas show, in which women wrestle both men and each other while wearing the traditional clothing. What a great way to make friends. Speaking of friends.
Dope. Hold on.
Buy a ticket to buy the wrestling.
What did she just hit her with? Was that a drawer?
Cholitas show, in which women wrestle both men and each other while wearing the traditional clothing. What a great way.
Oh man, I need to check that out, because that's actually... Wait, what's it called? Wrestling Cholita. Control... Shift Command 3. Screenshotting that. Going to look into that later, because that might be really entertaining. As somebody who really likes wrestling, we'll see.
Which women wrestle both men and each other while wearing the traditional clothing. What a great way to make friends. Speaking of friends. When it comes to diplomatic relations, Bolivia is kind of like, I don't like you, I think, but I'll still give you an embassy. First of all, with the exception of Peru, Bolivia's relations with all their immediate neighbors are all kind of strained a little bit. Paraguay, because of the Gran Chaco area dispute that led to war, then you have Brazil and the Acre War, and Chile with the Pacific War. Even Argentina had a few scuffles with Bolivia. Nonetheless, all these countries still have relatively close ties, and they all have their own embassies and consulates in Bolivia. Then we get to Israel, and things get a little weird, because the president doesn't really favor Israel and has threatened to cut ties with them, but many of the Bolivian people are incredibly against this, as Israelis make up a huge demographic of the tourism sector. In many places in La Paz, you can even find street signs and posters printed in Hebrew, and many of the locals actually learn how to speak Hebrew to accommodate the visitors. Without the Israelis, they actually might lose a huge potential in revenue. Bolivia's best new friends might be Venezuela and Cuba. This is actually kind of new considering that relations weren't really that strong before. The reason has something to kind of do with the fact that they all agree with the same anti-imperialist and socialist ideologies, which is kind of funny considering what happened to Che Guevara. In terms of their old best friend, Bolivia might probably consider Peru. They were even for a short period of time part of the same confederation and fought against Chile together. Peru, out of sympathy, has even allowed Bolivia to build a port on the ocean on their land that they can use. In conclusion, Bolivia likes to call itself the heart of South America, and considering all the amazing, astounding things that you'll encounter, it's not really hard to believe that saying. They just wish they had a coast. Stay tuned. Bosnia and Herzegovina is coming up next.
Oh, that one might be weird. That flag is interesting because it has like the stars on it, and then it has the star that cuts off at the bottom and picks up at the top. It implies that this flag is like a loop, which I find very fascinating, and I'm curious to where that comes from. Bolivia is really interesting. I think we got some really interesting countries today. I'm very rarely bored learning about a country, but I think today's were like especially fascinating to me, especially with how they fit in internationally.